Edinburgh was a very curious place today. A period of calm after the storm. But it's an illusion. Both sides are thinking, preparing, strategising for what comes next, for the battle they know is coming. Perhaps the most significant clash between London and Edinburgh, Westminster and Holyrood since before the Act of Union itself.
The people of Scotland have voted to give pro-independence parties a majority in the Scottish Parliament. So in no way can a referendum be described as just a demand of me or of the SNP. It is a commitment made to the people by a clear majority of the MSPs who have been elected.
The new Scottish Parliament looks a lot like the old Scottish Parliament. The SNP up by a seat, maintaining their remarkable hegemony. They won 47.7% of the constituency vote. No Westminster party has won an equivalent in the UK since 1966. As a result, they came one short of securing a majority with 64 seats. But with the Greens, there's a clear majority for independence, bigger than there was before. But even though there was a leader generally thought to be less impressive than the last, the Scottish Tories remained on 31 seats. Labour went back a bit, but more or less the same too. Nationalists and Unionists got about 50% of the vote each. It is a country divided and frozen in that division. Nonetheless, that majority for another referendum in Holyrood is there, and the most important question that Sturgeon must now determine is when she will decide to use it.
They certainly won't want to be having any referendum quickly because they won't be able to campaign in the way that they would like to. We obviously saw that through the election campaign we've just had. That, it was very restrictive for the political parties. So for the independence movement, they want to be out in the streets, they want to be leafleting, they want to have those stalls everywhere and do those marches, and they won't be able to do that at the moment. So they'll wait till COVID is over to the extent that that will become a possibility again. But also, I think they have to develop the plan for independence, and Nicola Sturgeon, through that campaign, was very clear that they don't have the answers to many of the questions that proved the problems for them in 2014.
The route map to a new plebiscite is also unclear. Boris Johnson has repeated his insistence that he will not grant another referendum. If he refuses to budge, Sturgeon's options are limited. If Boris Johnson continues to say no, what does she do? How does she achieve it? Because she's not going to have a wildcat referendum, that's become very clear. So what is she going to do? How can she obtain one?
We'll need to see what happens next. She will legislate for one. The Scottish Parliament will vote to have one. That's the democratic choice. It's then up to the United Kingdom government or others to oppose that and take it through the court system. If it ends up with the UK Supreme Court saying that it's a matter for the UK government to legislate on the Constitution, then we will see what happens next. Democracy needs to win. Britain needs to be a country in which consent and democracy wins, rather than one in which legal force is used to confound what people want. That can't stand. It won't be sustainable.
In the meantime, unionism considers its own response, attempting, perhaps incredibly, to suggest it wanted the politics out of this most political of questions to be removed.
The priority at the moment is not court cases, it's not independence legislation, it is recovery from the pandemic.
I regard it as a very great honour to be Prime Minister of Scotland.
They must know they'll have to tread carefully, that like Margaret Thatcher's refusal to budge on devolution in the 1980s, Westminster intransigence might fuel rather than satiate Scottish separatism. How can it be right that the British Conservative Party can hold a referendum on Brexit on the basis of 37% of the vote, but the Scottish National Party can't have a referendum on independence when in the Parliament they have over 50% of the vote and over 50% of the seats? In terms of having a pro-independence majority between the two parties. How can that be right?
Well, I think the major issue here is that there was a generation between our last vote on Europe. There hasn't been between the vote in 2014. And look, if we want to make it a generational vote, we say it's every 20 years, maybe that's something we need to look at. But what we can't do is trap Scotland in the insecurity and the uncertainty of constantly breaking out of the United Kingdom.
In other words, both sides are making a bet that the tale they're telling about legitimacy and who has it will win out, because that's what's going to matter. In some ways, this obsession over the question of whether or not the SNP had won a majority misses the point. For a start, it's not as if Boris Johnson would have acquiesced and granted a referendum had they won one. What matters much more in terms of what happens now isn't the numbers in the Parliament, but the numbers in the polls, about the extent to which Scots come to actively demand another referendum, not simply vote for one. In other words, which side can best effectively channel and corral public opinion about this debate. Because it seems that the only way that it's likely that Boris Johnson is going to grant another referendum is if the public opinion in Scotland, if public clamour in Scotland makes one irresistible. A contest then to come in the parliaments, in the courts of law, and most of all, in the court of public opinion. A clash of personal and political wills, and a question to be settled now at the heart of our new devolved constitution. Who, where, has the last word?
Lewis Goodall. Well, joining me now is Professor Stephen Tierney, the Director of the Edinburgh Centre for Constitutional Law. You were also the Parliamentary Advisor on the 2014 referendum, and you're the House of Lords Advisor on the Constitutional Committee. So you're steeped in this. What is the most likely scenario?
Well, it seems clear that the Scottish Government will bring forward a referendum bill. They've got one ready to go. The question then is the legality of that bill. There are certain steps they would have to get over initially. First of all, it would have to be signed off by the Scottish Government's lawyers themselves,
the Lord Advocate
as lawful. And then the presiding officer would also have to admit the bill to the Parliament as lawful.
So that's quite interesting, because the presiding officer isn't necessarily of the governing party.
Correct. The presiding officer is like the Speaker in the House of Commons, a neutral referee.
Could be a Green.
It could be. We don't know, so that person will be elected early in the
And what legal challenges could then be brought? Just say it doesn't get past that point.
Yes. Well, when the bill is admitted, if it's admitted, then it's open to the UK government through their law officers, such as the Advocate General, to challenge. If the UK government stands back and the bill passes and becomes an act, it's still open to a private citizen to challenge. So I think it's almost inevitable that this bill will end up in the Supreme Court.
But can you really justify ruling by the force of law and not by consent? Because is that a very good look for democracy?
Well, one argument is that law, by definition, is passed by consent. The Scotland Act was passed on the basis of a referendum itself, which was overwhelmingly approved. So that's the first point. I think also we need to look at the law as it stands, which is that the union is a reserved matter. There's some dispute as to whether or not this bill would clash with the union and would itself be incompetent, but I think it's likely that the court would find that to be the case.
But is there an argument to say, whether you support independence, whether you're Conservative, Liberal, Democrat, Green, whatever, that people in Scotland feel aggrieved that something that passes the majority of the Scottish Parliament can be not only set aside but denied by the powers at Westminster?
I think what's been unleashed by the election are these big political questions. And frankly, those will be the questions that the political parties will be engaging with. I can only really talk about the issue as a matter of law. And it seems to me that the framework of the legal question is one that probably has to be settled first before those political questions are addressed.
But could there be a way to have a different kind of referendum?
An advisory referendum, for example. I think the Scottish Government's argument will be that this is within competence because it's not intending to directly break up the union. It would simply be asking the people of Scotland for their opinion. Then it would come down to the courts to decide whether such a referendum is also a reserved matter because it affects the union. It seems to me from recent cases that the courts would find even a purportedly advisory referendum to relate directly to the union and therefore to be incompetent. We don't know that for sure, but it seems to me that that's the more likely scenario.
But briefly, do you think this is more likely to be denied than not, a referendum?
I think the Supreme Court would more likely than not, based on a decision in the Court of Session 2 weeks ago, I think it's more likely than not.
Thank you.